had some. So is it recording now? Yeah. Yeah. So recording, I had to come straight from work, so I don't have my usual camera setup and all that kind of jazz. But Dan Simon of Europe Pacific Canada, if anybody wants to talk to him over there about some business, he has been gracious enough to provide us with a camera. So we'll see what that looks like on YouTube. I guess this was the PDAX special. Unfortunately, Morgan Paulquin couldn't make it, but we're going to have Chris Horlacher and Chris Weisdorf speak tonight. And we have some good news from South America. Hugo Chavez is dead. Hey! You guys happy about that? No, it's great. If only if Castro died.
If his policies died, you could be happy.
Yes, well that's the thing. I mean, I think Hugo Chavez was. What did he do? He was nationalizing grocery stores. I remember seeing a little picture. He would have two prices in the window for like toothpaste. There would be Chris and Chris, please. There'd be two. I know, eh? Anyways, there'd be two prices in the store window. There'd be the Hugo Chavez price and the capitalist price, or the fair price and the capitalist price. And then there was the. And I know that what he's been doing, he's been seizing, he's been taking over all the, what do they call those things? TV stations, radio stations, just shutting everybody down. And
he banned advertising.
Banned advertising. There you go. Good classic kind of guy. Oh, and I heard he was about to ban guns too.
Seized a few media companies.
Yeah, seized media companies.
Grocery chains.
Yeah, all around good guy. So, but...
Deported Human Rights Watch.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, back in 2005. They wrote a report on him that he didn't like.
And also, I think that every year that he was in power, I think their oil production actually did decrease. I think about the only good thing I think he did was he decided to repatriate his gold, which I think was...
And I don't think he's gotten any of it yet.
So I'd say that was about the good thing, and it'll be interesting too because now Cuba is going to probably have to make something up because they're probably not going to get as much oil as they used to get from him. But our first speaker tonight is Chris Horlacher, and I guess his claim to fame, he was on the Ed and Ethan show, which is a sort of a libertarian podcast a little while ago, and he debated Bill Still, and I don't know how many of you guys know who Bill Still is. But he was it Money Masters?
Money Masters and The Secret of Oz.
Yeah, Money Masters and The Secret of Oz. So he is essentially the quintessential greenbacker. And a lot of people have been influenced by him, people like Ellen Brown and whatnot. A lot of the sort of...
Steven Zarlanga.
Steven Zarlanga. And our own, and of course our own Canadian Action Party, who has brought the, who's brought the suit against the... What is it? The Bank of Canada, saying that essentially they're just not printing enough money. They need to print even more than they're already printing. Anyway, so here we go. First, here to Chris. Woohoo!
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Didn't get to speak at the last meet because of a few prior engagements, but. Yeah, so today, I just wanted to kind of give you the addendum to the debate, because one thing I noticed with Bill Still is he keeps spewing out his story, and it's hard to keep up with all of the fallacies that he's coming up with. And it's not just bad economics, but it's bad history, and not only just slightly massaged history, but some of it is just outright fabricated. And so I wanted to talk to you guys today about a couple of the things that I didn't get to bring up during the debate because of time constraints, and just I got sidetracked trying to, beat down everything else that he was doing. So I won't go into too many details of the debate. You can go online and listen to that yourself. It's episode 48, and it starts about an hour and 20 minutes in. You can find the link on the Mises Institute Facebook wall, and it'll take you right there, and you can listen to the whole thing. But there were four sort of things that I wanted to touch on in today's talk. And so the first thing was some of the quotes he used, and what other researchers have noticed is that a lot of these quotes aren't always real. And he did actually employ one of these in the debates. And unfortunately, I didn't immediately shoot him down on it because there's so many of these that I wasn't 100% sure that it was a fabricated quote, so I didn't bring it up because I always like to be spot on. So, but when Bill used it, it didn't sit right with me. And so he brought up this quote from Ben Franklin where he says, and the quote is in his books and Ellen Brown's books, that he's talking about why there was an American Revolution. And so Bill thinks that Ben Franklin said, quote, the inability of colonists to get power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War. Now, there's also a variant of this quote, and it goes like this. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It's called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay no one. Both these quotes are fakes. There's no source for them anywhere. And if you ask them for one, they won't give it to you. So a lot of the times they'll say, oh, it's in Ben Franklin's autobiography. Well, I have Ben Franklin's autobiography. I've read it 3 times, and it's not in there. And it's not big. You can go and get it for yourself. It's about 180 pages long, and you can get through it in a couple of days. And you'll see for yourself. It's not there. In fact, the autobiography barely even mentions the revolution at all, just for reference. The other thing, and this is why it didn't sit quite right to me, is because if it really was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War, you would think that they would have mentioned it in the Declaration of Independence. But they don't, because it wasn't. So I went digging a little further just to see if there was anything that could have possibly been twisted or turned into these quotes. And there is something that could be mistaken for these things. And this was when Ben was, he traveled to England and he was called in front of the English Parliament. And they had asked him why the colonists had lost respect for their authority. To which he answered, to a concurrence of causes. The restraints lately laid on their trade, by which the bringing of foreign gold and silver into the colonies was prevented, the prohibition of making paper money amongst themselves, and then demanding a new and heavy tax by stamps, taking away at the same time trials by juries, the refusing to receive and hear their humble petitions. And this is from a book called The Parliamentary History of England from the earliest period to the year 1803. It was published in 1813 and it's under the chapter called The Examination of Benjamin Franklin. So he does mention that the prohibition of making paper money amongst themselves was one of the reasons why the colonists lost respect for Parliament. However, before that, he mentions that even before that, ostensibly a more important reason was the prohibition of them being able to bring in foreign gold and silver, which was a big deal because at the time most of them were using Spanish mill dollars. They were using other gold coins from other nations such as France. They were using guineas, they were using ducats, and so this particular restriction would have crippled their ability to export goods. And then on top of that, when they tried to start manufacturing their own paper money, they were crippled again when the British banned them from using that as well. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch, and they were put right in a bind where they essentially were locked out of trade with foreigners, and they were really, you know, if I couldn't earn my monetary medium and I couldn't create it, I wouldn't be a happy camper either. So it's fabricated quote, and this is something that's quite typical for the greenbackers. And if you go through Gary North's critique of Ellen Brown's book, which is called Web of Debt, she's recycling all the same kinds of arguments that you'll hear from Bill Still and Steven Zarlenga. And he has found so far at least 17 or 18 completely bogus quotes in the book. And these are the ones that the greenbackers are constantly throwing up. So it's pretty interesting that, you know, they keep doing it. And as a justification, I remember Ellen had said that, oh, well, you know, I type it into a Google search and it comes up 12 million times. And it's like, but that's not a source for it. The source would be what I gave you for the quote of Benjamin Franklin, the examination of Ben Franklin. So, phony quotes, if you're dealing with greenbacker literature, watch out for it. Make sure that everything is properly cited. So, another issue that Bill and greenbackers in general are particularly concerned about is gold. They don't like gold. They don't want us to go. They don't want anybody to be using gold. They think that this is some sort of ploy from these rich, elite international bankers, that they're going to use gold to keep us all under their thumb because they own all of the gold, so they say. But that's where things start to fall apart with this argument. Because according to the World Gold Council, which compiles about as authoritative as you can get in terms of gold statistics, in terms of who's producing it, how much there is, where it's going, who's buying it, what's it being used for, they say that there is over 170,000 tons of gold in circulation in existence in one form or another today. This is gold that could have been mined as much as 5,000 years ago. But that's the thing about gold. It doesn't go away. It doesn't corrode. It doesn't evaporate. It sits there. And that's why it's good for money, because it's durable, it's divisible, and it won't deteriorate over time. So of that 170,000 tons, how much of it is in the hands of these elite international bankers? Well, the World Gold Standard, or the World Gold Council, also publishes a list of the top 100 central bank holdings of gold. And if you add up the entire list, there's not even 32,000 tons of it in the hands of central banks. So not quite 20% of it is in the hands of these rich international elite bankers. The rest of it is in our hands, the people's hands, the people that Bill still says that we should place our faith in. So we own most of the gold, but apparently Bill doesn't want us to use them. So this is in the form of primarily jewelry. Every year, about 60% of my production gets turned into jewelry. About 35% of it gets turned into bullion and is bought up by investors and private banks and to, well, for the longest time, for a long time, central banks weren't touching bullion. They were selling bullion. It's only in the last few years that they've actually started to buy gold again. So, we own the gold. Gold has been the people's money for thousands of years. It still is today. And it really doesn't matter what form gold is in, whether it's in jewelry or bullion or coins or whatever it happens to be, because it can always be melted down, reshaped, and redone over and over and over and over again. And that's why, you know, we use it as money. It doesn't go away. So there's another story here, though. So gold being the tool of the rich, there's a particular family that the greenbackers like to demonize, and I think you all know who I'm talking about. The Rothschilds. Now, Bill likes to tell a little story about Nathan Rothschild and the Battle of Waterloo. And if you've watched The Money Masters, he hinges a good deal of his demonization of this family on this particular story. And the way it goes is during England's battle against Napoleon, when the Battle of Waterloo was getting ready to happen, Nathan Rothschild had an agent camped out somewhere on the battlefield, hiding, you know, in the bushes or something, watching the fight as it progressed, and his job was to essentially figure out who the victor was and immediately report back to Nathan before anybody else in England had any idea who had won the battle. So, as it happened, England won, and this is what Nathan was told by his messenger. And so Nathan took that information and essentially started a rumor that England had lost the war. And this caused a panicked sell-off at the London Stock Exchange, which Nathan used to buy up most of the stocks and bonds of the English government and the English Stock Exchange for a deep, deep, deep discount. And this was how this is one of the ways, one of the primary ways the Rothschild dynasty was created, was because of this one event. The problem is, it never happened. It was completely made up. But it wasn't made up by Bill. It was made up by the Nazis. And I'm not exaggerating. The film was released in 1940. The director was Erich Waschnick. And the name of the film is The Rothschild's Shares in Waterloo. And you can go and you can download this movie for free online and watch it for yourself. And the events depicted in the movie are exactly what Bill and Ellen and Steven Zarlenga bring up when they're talking about the Rothschilds. And just to be sure, I watched the segment of the Money Masters on the Waterloo story last night. Watched the Nazi film a few nights ago, just to kind of compare notes. And in Bill Still's movie, he mentions specifically the name of the Rothschild agent, which was Ruthworth. Ruthworth was a character in the movie. And he was one of a number of agents that Nathan had sent out in this movie to go and try and ascertain who had won. Because, you know, he didn't want to hinge the entire success of this particular gambit on the reliability of one single man. So he had a whole bunch of agents out at Waterloo trying to figure out who would win. And, you know, some guys were using pigeons to send messages back to him, and that didn't work out so well. And then there was this other guy, Ruthworth, who was kind of a bumbling fool, but he was actually the only guy who successfully managed to get the message back to him. So, kind of an interesting twist of events. But this is the source of that story. And when Bill made The Money Masters, he produced it and released it in like 1996. So I guess we could say when he made it, he didn't have the benefit of the internet, because I was able to figure this out in about 5 minutes on Google. But, you know, he's had it now for, you know,
Well, maybe
how much now? How much time now?
Well, a lot of these greenbackers are big fans of the Nazis, anyways. So
well, that is
of their economic
policy.
So maybe he had seen the movie. And thought it was a good movie.
Perhaps. Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, so that is the source. That's where this story comes from. It's not true. Do not believe it. If you are interested in knowing anything about the Rothschild family, Niall Ferguson wrote a 2-volume series on their family, and he actually enjoyed the benefit of going through all of their own personal family historical records. So most of it is primary source material, other real material from what they were doing in the London Stock Exchange on those very same days, and surprise, surprise, none of that actually happened. So fantastic, fantastic pair of books. Niall Ferguson, fantastic economist. I wouldn't say he's an Austrian, but he's pretty darn close. I'd say probably more, he'd feel a little more home at the Chicago School with Milton Friedman. So that's kind of where I would place Niall. So moving on. During the debate, he did bring up one historical fact I was not aware of. And Bill, if you're watching, thank you. The English counterfeiting operation during the Revolutionary War. Now this did actually happen. he did make one mistake though. He said it was being done by 2 ships parked in Boston Harbor. Now those ships may have been there, and they may have been counterfeiting Continentals there, but the real bulk of where these fake notes were coming from was the British government that had been set up and was running out of New York. Unfortunately, Bill has thrown his entire weight of his argument behind this operation, saying that the hyperinflation of the continental currency was due to the British activities. The only thing is that in every piece of information I've been able to pull up so far, and we've pulled up some pretty good ones. Ed and Ethan found a document by the British Numismatic Society, who, if anybody would know about what's going on in old currencies, it would be them. So I've read the entire paper. There is no information anywhere on where anybody tries to come up with any kind of estimate about how much the English were able to counterfeit. Everything I read, the largest seizure of counterfeit notes was when they stormed a ship and found $1 million in Continentals. So these hadn't made it out into circulation yet. But let's just to compare the scale here, the Continental government issued $241 million in Continentals, but they weren't the only ones. I failed to mention this, but they weren't the only ones who were issuing new money in the United States. The colonial governments, the state governments, were also issuing notes to fight the Revolutionary War. So on top of the $241 million that the Continental Congress issued, the state governments issued another $210 million on top of that. So the devaluation just from those 2 issuing authorities was absolutely tremendous, with 300 to 1. So, and that wasn't the first time they had experimented with paper money. The first by 1850, pretty much every single colony except for Virginia had come out with their own paper money and devalued it, and it caused economic mayhem, which is eventually what led the British to banning the issuance of paper notes in the colonies. So, Massachusetts came out with theirs, devalued at 11 to 1. Connecticut came out with theirs, devalued at 9 to 1. 10 to 1 in the Carolinas, 23 to 1 in Rhode Island. So, not a pretty story. So, further to this point though, here we have an example, a concrete example of inflation being used as a tool of war. Governments are inflating the currency in a deliberate act to destabilize and destroy an economy. So why is that a bad thing when a foreign government does it, and sound monetary policy when our own government does it? Who knows? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in the debate. But I wanted to kind of bring this home a little bit because, as Redmond mentioned, we do have some greenbackers lurking around in our own backyard. Now, there is the Canadian Action Party, but I've read the court briefs. The Canadian Action Party themselves is not on the docket. Oh, okay. It is an organization called COMER and 2 individuals. Now, COMER stands for the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform. It's an organization started by Canadians who share many of the same views as the U.S. greenbackers. They argue a lot of the same points, they use the same history, and they figure that, we should stop borrowing any money the government needs at interest and just print it up. And we can control for inflation by eliminating the fractional reserve system, and it's a lot of monetary smoke and mirrors and trickery, and when you really go through all of the details of their different kinds of plans, it's not going to work. And there's thousands of examples throughout history where governments have tried the exact same system that they're proposing, and it all ends in disaster. So I went to the Comer website because I wanted to find out a little more about these guys, and there really isn't a whole lot there. They don't talk about their history, they don't talk about their founders, they just they talk about how they want to reappropriate the Bank of Canada. So what I was able to find out, though, is their intellectual core. Now, the guy who is sort of responsible for the tone of Comer, his name is William Krem, and William Krem is another name on the lawsuit. So I have a feeling Comer is his organization. He started it in 1970, and so Comer is sort of his organization that he wants to use to sort of bend the Bank of Canada towards his own ends. And he's been at it for quite a while. He's written a lot of books, and if you go through the Comer bookstore, every single one of the books on the Comer bookstore are one of his books. So, you know, at the risk of committing an ad hominem fallacy here, well, who is William Krem? Well, there's not much out there on this guy. But I was able to find out that he's the former leader of the Canadian branch of a political party called the Fieldites. And the Fieldites were a splinter organization of the Communist League of America. In 1934, that's what they were known as. They're known officially as the Organizing Committee for a Revolutionary Workers' Party, and then they also switched their name, you know, a lot of name changes here. They switched their name to the League for a Revolutionary Workers' Party. So, you know, that should kind of tell you a little bit about William Krem's background. So, they were basically Trotskyites. They eventually kind of absorbed the Trotskyist movement in Canada. And it's ironic because if you read through Comer's website and their sister websites, they have one called The Dream of Canada, as if an imaginary legal entity can have dreams or feelings or anything of the kind. But, so, they really don't like neocons. They go on and on and on and on about neocons, but here's the rub. Neocons are also Trotskyites. There's a very good article on LouRockwell.com. You can read all about it, but it goes through the intellectual foundations of the neocon movement. It talks about Leon Strauss, Bill Kristol, and all of their the main intellectual movements and where they got their inspiration from.
That was Ron Paul. In 2003, Ron Paul.
Oh, he wrote one too?
It's called Neocon.
Neocon. There's another one on there as well if you search for...
Justin Raimondo?
Maybe. Yeah, if you go into LouRockwell.com and you type in neocon and Trotsky, there's a few articles in there that kind of cover this history. So, so Comer is basically Krem's front organization to accomplish his plan of taking over the Central Bank of Canada. And I mean, this is pretty much par for the course for communists, because one of their #1 issues in all of their manifestos is always either taking over or establishing a central bank, because this is, you know, it's an entity that they see as a powerhouse. It's one of the most powerful entities in any country, because if you control the money, you can control interest rates, you can control prices, you can control wages, and you can essentially have nearly unlimited influence over the society. So that's usually why it's at the top of the planks, and I suspect that you know, Comer's agenda is not necessarily to improve the lot of everyone in a general sense, but whoever their constituents happen to be, and they'll cater to the words their interests, like, you know, any other kind of political party. They're not particularly unique or special, so I don't think they should be treated as such.
So has Comer's, I haven't really paid attention to it. Has it gone anywhere, the lawsuit? Have you?
No.
Okay.
I don't think it's been dismissed yet, but it most likely will be, because I was reading it, and they're trying to twist the Bank of Canada Act into meaning certain things that it's all basically they're trying to decipher a new meaning and intent of the legislation.
Okay, cool. But yeah, did we want to? Does anybody have any questions for Chris about greenbackers? And
Well, two questions. First, for everyone's benefit, or mainly mine, what is a greenbacker again? That's somebody.
Well, a greenbacker, it's kind of transformed into a more of a colloquial term, but the greenbacker term originates from the Greenbacker Party, which was a post-Civil War political party in the United States, which was they'd become completely enamored with the Lincoln greenbacks, which were an unbacked paper note. Well, they originally were backed by silver. It was a $5 note. It was backed by silver initially, but about 9 months after they started bringing them in, there was such a big run on silver on these notes that they just totally delinked it. And then Lincoln issued millions of these things in order to finance the North during the Civil War.
The back of the note was green.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where it green.
So essentially anybody who, in these days, it's used to basically define anybody who is an advocate of unbacked paper money.
Like a pure
issued directly by the Treasury.
Oh, okay.
Not borrowed through the whole central banking, shenanigans.
And they'll say things like, we don't need to tax because we can just print money, right? Like,
yeah.
Who needs to tax? We just print money. That's one of their big planks.
And that's not even a joke. They've had protests where they're holding up signs that say that.
Yeah.
Why tax when we can just print money?
It's money.
There was one of the. I remember I tried to find this story in the news. I think it was in the National Post. But when Comer launched the lawsuit, there were a few news stories, and they quoted, I think, the lawyer who's representing them. And the lawyer is basically, he came right out, there's a quote in the story where he says, oh yeah, we can just print up $1 trillion, pay off the debt, buy a bunch of new bridges and highways, and everything will be great.
Yeah.
And he's actually on record in the newspaper saying that.
Sounds like it came from Hugo Chavez.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you talked about that film made by the Nazis where the guy got the story about the Rothschild.
The Waterloo.
patriarch, right? So I guess are you implying that, or are we to assume that the film that the Nazis made was just a propaganda piece to get people angry at the Jews, or?
Oh yeah, it was. If you watch it, there's a lot of that kind of undertone to it. Because they're constantly bringing up the fact that Nathan is this dirty Jew who's, he doesn't care about the well-being of the people in England, and he's just a money-running, kind of...
So we know the story was fabricated by them?
It was entirely fabricated by them. There's no like you can look at in news sources to try and corroborate that story, and it's just not there.
Well, then there would have been. I mean, are there still records of the stock exchanges from that time? I would imagine there would be, right?
Well, there's old newspapers.
Yeah, and there would have been even records of trades and these sorts of things. But anyways, okay, cool, Chris. I think we've got Chris Weisdorf coming up. Thanks a lot, man. And Chris is gonna.